Good evening and welcome to the first video in our Costumes in Your Closet series. My name is Kelly Jean with Adult and Teen Services, and throughout this series we are going to talk about how to find costumes already in your closet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to create costumes using items you probably already own that may be in your closet or other areas of your home, what to do if you can't find the pieces you're looking for, and how to put them together to have a costume that is unique, saves you time and money, and helps you have fun in the process. So we're going to get started tonight with our first video in this series. And I'm going to talk to you today about what we mean by costumes already in your closet. Right, so costumes in your closet. What are they? Why should you wear them and develop costumes this way? We're going to talk more about that this evening, and then we're going to continue on with our series. Throughout this DIY costuming series, I'm going to share some of my personal tips and also give you guys some examples of costumes that I've created in the past using clothing that I have already owned or could find to give a second life to. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is how is a costume different from your everyday clothes? For me, the biggest difference is context. Where you wear them makes a big difference as to whether or not it's a costume. So a few examples of how we develop context for our clothes are by the types of clothes that we choose, how we style them or put them together, the environment we wear them in, and sometimes by the other people in that environment and what they're wearing. It's easy to tell when somebody else is in a wedding dress if you're at a wedding. So that kind of gives your clothing context, which might give a suit a different feeling from the same suit worn to an office, things like that. So the same thing is going to go for costumes. They're going to feel slightly different based on how you're wearing them, where you're wearing them, and what other people are wearing as well. So my recommendation, and this whole series is based on the idea of using the clothes that you already own, your regular everyday clothes, and giving them context in order to develop them into costumes. In the right context, there may be no difference between your everyday clothes and the costume that you're wearing. That probably means that you have lots of costume options already in your closet right now. So why should you use regular clothes? We're going to show you how to use that to your advantage. Let's talk about some pros of using your regular clothing in order to create costumes. First thing, as we said, you probably already have them. So accessibility. Most people have clothing. It's just that simple. Chances are that you are wearing some right now. For some costumes, certain costumes, this could mean you don't have to leave your house and you already have stuff available at hand and at a moment's notice. So accessibility is the first pro. The next is that it can be no cost or low cost. Shopping by your own closet first means you might actually not have to shop at all. Even if you do end up having to do some shopping and all you can do is find one piece in your closet that you already own, it's one less piece that you have to purchase and spend money on. With the right items and styling, your costume could end up being completely free. So that's why you always want to start by just seeing what you have. And then the last one here, or the next one, excuse me, is it's economical, sustainable, and reusable. So using the items you already have is better for your wallet and it's better for the planet. Many Halloween costumes are fast fashion, single-use items. This goes doubly for parents, as your kids are likely to outgrow the costumes you buy for them. And even if you are able to reuse them with siblings or give them to neighbors, you maybe get 3-ish uses out of an item because no one wants to be the same thing every year and trends keep changing. In addition to you have your growth rate. So kids just outgrow clothing quickly. If you are not able to use items you already own, if you thrift or borrow, this is just another way to give those items life. If you end up buying some brand new components of your costumes and then incorporate them into your everyday wear or your wardrobe, you get more bang for your buck. So that's another way that you can save money by doing it that way as well. One of the most important things for me with using items that you already own in your own clothing is regular clothes tend to have better fit. They're usually higher quality and they're generally more comfortable. Costumes that I have bought out of the box from the past have been flimsy and scratchy, and this may become an issue if you or a child has some sensory processing concerns, or if you're going to be wearing them while you're moving around outside for trick-or-treating, or you're going to be in them for a long day if you're wearing them to a party or work or school. The other issue with costumes is they are often one size fits all, which frankly rarely fits anybody, or any body, I should say. It is usually easier to repurpose something than to try to make it from scratch. So that's another reason you want to at least start with an item of quote unquote regular clothing. Personally, I've taken a number of sewing and fashion classes, and I can say with confidence, nothing that I have ever tried to sew has turned out the way that I wanted it to when I'm making things from scratch. That is not so when I'm just making alterations. So I'd rather leave the creating of garments to the professionals and just adjust them so that they fit better, they're more comfortable, and that they suit my needs as a costume. Speaking of being comfortable, if you've ever experienced Halloween in the Midwest, you know that it can be 80 degrees and sunny, or it can be 25 with snow or rain. By using your own clothes, you have an opportunity to kind of layer up or down, and that way you can make yourself comfortable for the day of, and you can kind of make some of those choices a little bit more last minute as well. The other benefit is how many of us have had a really killer costume. It's just too cold, and then our parents make us put on those big puffy coats, and we end up hiding all of the cool work that we put into it, or just the costume that we really wanted to wear, and then nobody gets to see it. By using your own clothes, you can make choices like jackets, coats, things like that, and make a choice that actually benefits your costume and adds to it instead of hiding it. And then another thing that's really important for me personally is that using my own clothes gives me creative flexibility. It allows you to create kind of whatever you want. You aren't restricted to what's already in the Halloween or party store, and you can create something that's totally unique. And that's pretty scalable. If I save money and time on a main piece of my costume, then I have some flexibility in the other choices that I make, other props and accessories that I can create. So it lets me decide how much work, time, and effort that I actually want to put into a piece. And the last reason is kind of a bonus, which is what we were talking about earlier for context. When you use regular clothes, it's really great for groups. So let's explore that for a moment. So here's what I mean by that. It's easy for people to use what they already have. So once again, clothing that is already in your closet tends to be more accessible for people, which is really great when you're scaling it to a group costume, especially if it's for like work or school. If you have more than one party or event, you might have a costume that you're doing as a group for an event. And then you also have your personal costume that you want to spend a little bit more time and money on later in the week or later in the day. So using regular clothes that people already have, it's more accessible. It saves people money if they have to make more than one purchase. And if they don't have to purchase anything at all, it's going to increase the likelihood that people are going to participate. So that's one thing that's great for groups. Another reason is using clothes that you already have makes those costumes easy to repeat or replicate, but with sort of individual customizations for people. So for example, if you ask everyone to wear a black shirt and jeans for the costume, and then you bring in some kind of other prop or element, so that's just their base, it's likely that everyone already has those items and will participate. The easier you make it for people, the more likely they are to participate. Plus, they can make it customized and comfortable. So if somebody wants to wear a long sleeve black shirt or a short sleeve black shirt or different styles of jeans, you're able to give people that flexibility and freedom. Later in the series, we're going to give some specific examples of how to style some wardrobe staples in more depth, like those jeans and black shirt. One thing to mention though with group context or with group costumes is that they are more context reliant than an individual costume. We mentioned earlier that context is that distinguishing feature in a costume, and this is a double-edged sword in groups. Context leads to impact. So with a group, you can get higher impact with lower effort. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. So on its own, a person wearing a solid colored shirt, a beanie, and khakis doesn't mean much. This just doesn't look like anything. But add 6 other people in other colors, and it becomes more recognizable. Can you guess that this is the 7 Dwarfs? And we can add even more. We can scale it once again. And if we bump it up with a few more accessories, it becomes even more recognizable. And then we can also add on props to give each personality and creative flexibility. All right, so before I move on, I very quickly want to go over some potential drawbacks to be aware of when using your own clothing for costuming. In my opinion, there are basically 2 main cons and one that can kind of go either way. All right, the obvious drawback of using what you already have is that it may be difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. This is going to be especially true for characters with more complex costumes. Similarly, costumes from regular clothing tend to give more impressions than exact replicas. While it's not impossible, it is less likely that you might have something like futuristic plate armor or a historically accurate Victorian gown already at hand. So less variety and accuracy are 2 drawbacks of shopping your own closet. And then the last thing I want to mention is about time. Time can be a potential drawback, but once again, it can kind of go either way depending on what you're looking for. And it's going to depend on how much you want to put in it as well. You may have to spend more time either shopping around or fixing and creating pieces if you use regular everyday clothing than you would if you bought a set. However, if you're able to create a costume completely out of things that you already own, it actually saves time. It keeps you from going to the store. It keeps you from having to do anything else. So it really depends on how much you're willing to put into it and what types of costumes you are looking for. All right, next step is getting inspired. As with any creative endeavor, the hardest part is coming up with an idea. Where can you go to look for inspiration? Well, you're already off to a good start with this video series. We hope that the ideas and examples give you a starting point. And if you are looking more specifically for those, you can skip right on to 10 costumes in 10 minutes, which is the culmination of all of the tips of this series and gives you just a couple of ideas from stuff that I put together for my closet. Or you can take a look at our Instagram and our Facebook page, where we're going to have a couple more wardrobe staples as well. Right. Another place to find inspiration is in your closet. That's the name of the game. As I said before, most people have clothing. If you're anything like me, chances are that you have enough clothes that you don't really know what clothes you even have. Think of it kind of like reverse engineering. When you take a look at your closet, you may be surprised by what you already own. When you start to mix and match pieces you have, you can get an idea of what is possible. So here's a personal example. If I go into my closet right now, I know that something that I have is a white hooded cape, which I used for my wedding. And that's something that I've only used once or twice so far. So I can look at that and say, this is going to give me some inspiration. How can I get some more use out of this item? Right away, I can come up with a couple of characters that use white robes or capes or hoods. And in fact, I was able to repurpose it last year for an Ice Queen Halloween costume. So let me show you what that looks like. All right, so this is that finished look all put together. Some tips if you wanted to recreate this. I used a bridesmaid dress and once again, cape that was already in my closet. So I went into my closet, grabbed those 2 items, and I made my look from that inspiration rather than thinking, I want to be an Ice Queen and then going in the other way. So that was something that just stood out to me as items that I already had. So what I did to pull the look together was just a couple of fun tips for makeup. I used a cold color palette, and I was able to create kind of a frosty look on my eyelashes by applying a light shadow when my mascara was still wet. I'll give you a second to look over that slide if you want to screenshot it or take any more notes. And we are going to come back to that cape again later in this series, so make sure to stay tuned. I'm going to mention it again and how else we can style it. Right. Other ways that clothes already in your closet can give you inspiration is by era or by purpose. If you notice that you have a lot of retro clothing in your closet, if that's just kind of your style, or if you're a bit of a pack rat and you have clothes from when they weren't so retro or vintage at all, you can lean into that and let that be its own costume or pick an icon from the era to emulate. So up here, we have just a couple of options of how we can use those vintage feeling clothes to create costumes. And then here are some icons from those eras that you can also create. One of the ones we have on this page is a Stevie Nicks costume. There's some suggestions for how to do a Stevie Nicks look in our companion reels as well, if you look under the little black outfit wardrobe staple. Another thing I mentioned was purpose. Old uniforms have an obvious purpose and function and can be reused as costumes as well. So here is an example of when I did that. So this was a costume I put together where I and my husband both became characters from the podcast Wolf 359, which takes place in space. So what we did was we repurposed my husband's HVAC uniform as the base for our spacesuits, and then we added the props to bring our characters to life. So we were Doug Eiffel and Renee, and what we did was we went into the podcast story and pulled out some elements in order to make those be unique to themselves. So this is one of those kind of if you know props. The very first episode, there is a plot with the toothpaste and the cigarette. So we have those in there for Doug. And then I also have a copy of Price and Carter's Deep Space Survival Procedure and Protocol Manual, as well as some merch from the website from Wolf 359 with a quote from my character already on it. So by bringing those props into it, I was able to give a little bit more life and meaning to that. Another way to get inspiration from your closet is to focus on color palette. Many characters, especially those in animation, have a specific and iconic color combination. You can use that to create the same color palette in order to create an impression, and then accessorize to create that context we keep talking about. Remember, context is impact. So that's why things like accessories and props can really just bring something to life. And it makes it different from just wearing your regular clothes, because you wouldn't usually carry around a tube of toothpaste, for example. So here's a couple of examples of characters and their color palettes. So we've got kind of the primary colors and secondary colors. And depending on what types of clothing you pick and how you accessorize them, they're going to have slightly different contexts and meaning. But when you see those palettes, it's really easy to already start pointing yourself in that direction. An example of this you may have heard of before is called Disney bounding, which is when people dress up in outfits that are influenced by Disney characters when they go into the parks or when they are bound for Disney. And that's where that comes from. Part of the reason for that is Disney is very strict about what they let you wear into the parks, and they do not allow guests to wear real costumes, as it may be confusing or even dangerous for another guest to mistake you for a cast member. So you can see here two examples. One of them was my personal example and one pulled from the internet. And what we've done here is just taken those color palettes and some of those silhouettes and styled them in a way that is reminiscent of those characters. In my example here, once again, context kind of helps, because when you're looking at any of us individually, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But when the three of us are all standing together, it's a little bit more obvious what those things mean from our color palette. And this example is pretty common, and that's because this is an example of a Disney-bound type outfit for races. These costumes are almost always based on color palette solely, as people usually want to stick to comfortable athletic wear, as in this example. All right, so here's another example for you. In this example, I blended elements from 2 different scenes of the movie Beauty and the Beast based on dress color from the beginning of the movie and then accents from the famous ballroom scene later, as well as a few nods to the plot with a book-shaped bag and a rose. So you can see there how I chose the palette and then I gave it context. In addition to being able to use this color method to find inspiration at home, there's become a cult following of people who enjoy just dressing this way, and you can find a lot of inspiration just by looking up Disney bounding ideas on Google or Pinterest. Speaking of Pinterest, that is another great way to find inspiration. For those unfamiliar, Pinterest is a virtual pin board. It's sort of a pin board meets social networking site. You can find all sorts of fashion inspiration, recipes, crafts, and more. Do be aware that these ideas will usually skew a little bit more towards crafty DIY side. And another note of caution is some ideas on Pinterest can be deceivingly easy or very vague in instructions, which is where we get that all too familiar term, Pinterest fail. So that is something to be aware of when you are looking for costume inspiration on Pinterest. Another place to pull inspiration from is pop culture. Take a look at celebrities and characters that are currently in the zeitgeist and will be more easily recognizable. This gives you some flexibility on that impression side of the spectrum. TV shows, in particular, are often easier to replicate than movies, as there's more variety in their outfits and the pieces tend to be less intricate, i.e., they wear a lot of regular clothes that you can find. Although this is not a hard and fast rule, especially if you're looking at TV shows that are dealing with a particular time period or era. We talked earlier a little bit about group costumes. This is also really a great way to find group costumes, is to look at TV shows, because ensemble shows tend to have a lot of characters with a lot of variety in palettes, types of things that they wear, and you can give each other context so that you spend less time on your actual costume, because you're gonna make more sense as a group. So here are just a couple of examples that you can use this year that I just pulled out from current pop culture. So we have the She-Hulk, which is a great costume for an individual. Barbie and Ken is a great couples costume, or an example of an ensemble cast might be the show Euphoria. With Barbie and Ken, something that I have done before to create sort of an 80s-esque outfit is basically take a one-piece bathing suit and put it over either bike shorts if it's cold, if it's going to be hot out and you want to be a little bit cooler, or if you have like a fun pair of leggings. That's a great way to kind of create that workout look without having to buy an 80s one piece. All right, I would be remiss as a librarian if I didn't also point to books and magazines for inspiration. This can be very literal with books and magazine subjects like cosplay, sewing, or magazines like Better Homes and Gardens has a 100 Halloween Ideas copy, and you can get that here at that link. I'm going to put that up on the screen for you. In addition to looking for costume-specific books and magazines, you can also get ideas for costumes from books and magazines. So a different tip is to look for characters in books, especially those that don't have screen adaptations yet, as this allows for a lot more creativity and flexibility. So here's an example of a costume I created on a book series, and that series is A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. So you can see how being together as a group really helps with that context. And then we brought in some props to help bring our costume together as a concept. And if you're familiar with the source material, you may recognize that. If we were separated, it might be easy for Klaus, for instance, to be mistaken for Mr. Rogers with his red sweater. But as a set, when everything's together, it reads a little bit more clearly. As a side note here, with any kind of references or connotations, you do have to keep in mind that people have different experiences and viewpoints. Not everyone's going to have read or watched this series, and be prepared to have people ask questions or not recognize your costume right away. That's okay. It's all in the spirit of fun and self-expression. And as long as you know who you are, that's all that really matters, right? Whether that's your costume or in real life. All right, and then the last one I'm going to talk about today as far as inspiration is the whole, has anyone ever told you that you look like X celebrity? That's a really great way to kind of get an idea for where to start. Although this is definitely not necessary, picking people with whom you share certain features like hair color or face shape, or if you both wear glasses, it can just save you a step in the accessorizing phase, as you already look like that person, and you might not have to buy a wig or glasses or whatever you need in order to pull that together. This may be something you want to consider if you're looking for like a last minute or a very low cost costume. So pulling a couple of these ideas together, I'll show you a costume that I made in the past. So I found a chef's coat in my closet from a previous job. And this was right around the time that the Gilmore Girls reboot season was coming out. A Year in the Life was being released. And Melissa McCarthy and I both have round faces and darker hair. And we really have similar body shapes as well. Our builds are really similar. With the styling, and then also the cultural context, because once again, that show was coming out at the time, my look-alike features, I was able to be recognized not just as a generic chef, but as the character Melissa plays in Gilmore Girls, Suki St. James, even without having the exact same costume elements. So you can see that I have a different color bandana and a different color chef coat, but I have the hoop earrings and I have the same kind of style of hair and things. And I actually won a most realistic costume for that particular party. My disclaimer for this is that you should absolutely not feel restricted into choosing characters that look like you, nor should you ever gatekeep somebody who chooses a character or costume in that manner. Let's just let people enjoy stuff. This is one of the many, many ways to find inspiration, and it's a great example of why representation is so important and it matters so much. Everyone deserves to have fun and feel good about themselves on Halloween and every day of their lives. So that wraps up part one of costumes in your closet. These are just a few tips to get you started on learning what to look for, figuring out what you already have, and finding inspiration. Remember, these are only guidelines. I hope you feel inspired to start using your wardrobe in a new and fun way as we get into spooky season. In our next video, we'll explore when and how to expand our search if we don't have the pieces we're looking for already in our closets yet. So stay tuned for more costumes in your closet. Have a great night.